Is there a characteristic or maybe an aspect of your family that it seems like maybe unintentionally and most likely unintentionally that many people in your family, especially your birth family, seem to have, that they share something in common? Maybe everybody seems to play a musical instrument. No matter what it is, it just seems like aunts, uncles, grandparents, everyone plays something. Or maybe it's a particular sport. Maybe everyone loves to fish or hunt or play golf. Maybe it could even be a common association that you have. Maybe people are big into country clubs or sports bars or bookstores, whatever it may be. Is there something that you have in common? For me and for my family, it's poodles. That's the common element that we have, at least on my mother's side. Poodles. My aunt had a poodle for a really, really long time. My grandmother, she had toy poodles, and toy poodles are the teeny ones. They're 6 pounds and under, so the kind you can kind of stuff in a little bag if you wanted to and carry them around. My grandmother had poodles for basically ever since I was born, and even my mom and dad together, they had poodles pretty much for my entire life. Now, this gene disposition for poodles didn't totally pass on, to my sister and I, but even I eventually got a poodle, although it was not a toy poodle, it was a standard poodle. But in my family, it seemed like poodles were everywhere in some way. That was our common characteristic. I remember as a kid, and I don't know exactly how old I was when I was wondering about this, but I was wondering about my aunt's poodle. She had this poodle. The poodle's name was Fondue. I don't know what the inspiration was for that. Probably could fit in a fondue pot. But obviously I'd seen many poodles at this point in my life. So I was wondering about Fondue because Fondue's teeth were all kind of messed up, like in her face. It was all kind of messed up. And being a kid, I wondered, well, maybe she just was born that way, with this sort of like messed up thing. Maybe that was just sort of a genetic thing in some dogs. Maybe just some dogs look weird, right, when they're born. I mean, maybe that's what it is all about. How else do you explain someone like Marty Feldman? He's a weird-looking guy for sure. But he made a lot of money looking weird, so, more power to him, looking weird and going with it. So I thought maybe this dog looked a little bit strange because just that's how the dog was born. Maybe that happens sometimes amongst poodles. But at least the way I remember it, I was asking my mom about this, or we were in a conversation or something, and what had actually happened is that the neighbor's dog had gotten out and attacked this poodle. Viciously attacked the dog, and in that attack, that is basically what injured the dog, and that's why the dog's face looked the way it did. Terrible, horrible stuff. And as a kid, I was just wondering, how can something like this happen? I remember feeling very, very angry in that moment. You know how you can have that type of anger that can kind of, boil up inside of you from deep down inside that you don't really know what to do with, that type of deep-seated anger that can be there. It's the type of anger that if it breaks out, you're liable to do something dumb in the moment, something extreme, because it tends to produce an impulsivity in some way. And that's kind of the feelings that I had. It's the same type of anger that produces road rage, where, there's that jerk who cut you off, and now you're going to race him down the road, right? That type of anger. Or it's even the type of anger that, a spouse, they find out about infidelity of their other spouse, it turns the spouse into a killer, right? This impulsivity. And often, in many cases, it is anger that might even stem from a legitimate injustice in some way. Now, sometimes when people sense this anger in themselves or they see it in other people, they will say that cliche proverb, don't get angry, get even, right? That's the phrase that they will say, even if whatever getting even means is in some way unethical or immoral or violent, which I don't think I need to say is not really something we should be doing, right? I mean, that's not what God calls us to do. That's not the bar he sets for us as Christians. Now, when I was a kid, I couldn't do anything about this dog attack from the past whenever it had happened. I couldn't do anything to help this little dog right now. So I was really without any sort of plausible action at all. And there wasn't really a behavior change I needed to make in myself at that point either. But would it have been really useful for me to even though I couldn't do something, to just kind of hang on to the anger, hang on to the feelings of injustice and unrighteousness? I mean, because that's all he really had in many ways. Was there not something better I could do? In 1993, Lance Armstrong began his professional career as a cyclist. And in the first several years of being a cyclist, he showed some success. But it was just a few years into his career that he was diagnosed with a potentially fatal form of cancer. But it was out of his survival, because he did survive through that whole battle, it was out of that survival of cancer that he established the fairly well-known Lance Armstrong Foundation to assist other cancer survivors as they are seeking to battle through and survive cancer for themselves. But the main reason that Lance Armstrong is a somewhat household name is not because of the cancer foundation that he established, but it's actually because part of his story is that cancer survival story, and that being coupled with his standout success following being a survivor of cancer. In the Tour de France, which is pretty much the most well-known of cycling events worldwide, I don't know why I decided to throw in the accent there, France, but Tour de France, but I did, so there you go. He had 7 consecutive victories. 7 consecutive victories. But of course, that again rose him to fame. Again, with him being this hero, if you will, to battle cancer, still come back, do all this amazing stuff. But those of us who are familiar with this story, we know that after that, later on down the road, there were the accusations and ultimately the proof of doping, of him using performance-enhancing drugs, and they were convictions that eventually led him to be stripped of all of his titles. But I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago, and the guy was actually interviewing him and asking him how he got there. How did he get to the point where he decided he wanted to use these drugs? To the point of, admittedly, just be willing to cheat. How do you get there from where you were? And what he shared is that in a world of cycling, where at the time there was very inadequate drug testing and very inadequate enforcement, in many cases they couldn't even test for some of these drugs, in that moment in history, virtually all of the extreme athletes, virtually all of the world-class cyclists, especially in Europe, were using these drugs. Basically everybody. And because they were all using these drugs, they were dominating the field. Whereas the American team at the time, in the beginning, they weren't using any of that stuff. They weren't doing anything. And though they were good enough to compete and be there and be present, they just couldn't keep up with everyone else. That there was enough of an edge provided by taking those drugs that they just couldn't surmount it regardless of how hard and how well they trained. Now, I don't know that Lance and the whole team necessarily got angry. I'm sure there was a sense of anger about that, of the injustice of it all on some level. But I'm sure they also were feeling jealousy because of what these other athletes were able to achieve. They were probably feeling like this was all unfair, that if you play by the rules, you just can't succeed. So they were probably feeling kind of passed over. So when confronted with this injustice that was hurting them, when they were given the choice to reject the drugs and be content with probably never winning in the field, never gaining fame, never gaining fortune, never gaining any trophies, or to take these drugs at the cost of their integrity, Lance went on to say that the entire team decided to do the latter, take the drugs, and level the playing field with the other elite athletes. And in a sense, that was their way of getting even, right? That's what they chose to do. And the result of them starting to take the performance-enhancing drugs was clear, as the Americans went from being unremarkable to being the best of the best among the cyclists. Although in retrospect, obviously, that choice cost Lance Armstrong and the American cycling team a lot of damage. But all of us want to succeed, right? I mean, all of us want to do well in life. We want to be rewarded for our hard work and the labor and the dedication that we put in. We want to be rewarded for the sacrifices that we make. That would be ideal, the ideal world. We also want to live in a world where if there are those who are taking advantage of the system, if those who are reaping ill-got gains, they're punished and stopped when they're doing that. We want to be in a world where the good people get what they deserve and the unrighteous and evil people get what they deserve, rather than the good people so often being passed over. So that's best case scenario, what we would all hope for. But obviously, many times that just doesn't happen. That is not the world that we actually live in. And many times, we can't actually right those wrongs. Sometimes it's just not possible to do that while also walking in righteousness at the same time, as God calls us to do. And sometimes, even if we do have maybe the possibility to doing something, we don't have the capacity for it. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff going on in our lives, a lot of other things that we have to take care of, and there's so many wrongs in the world, we just might not have the time or the energy to take care of everything. But we can still get angry about it. We can still get upset. Now, if that anger, if maybe even the jealousy or the frustration, if those things motivate us towards a positive action, not sin, but a positive action in some way, that could be good. That could be good for us. That could be good for the situation. But if we can't, or if those emotions don't compel us in that direction, where should we seek to be emotionally? What should our emotional state be? Do we just stay there, stewing in the anger and the frustration forever? I mean, honestly, that's what many of us do, right? I mean, I do that sometimes. But as a result, when that's where we are, we rarely find happiness or contentment or satisfaction because we're just angry about what we're missing out on, or what others are missing out on. But consider the appeal of coming to terms with a form of acceptance of the injustice. Not excusing the injustice, yet being able to live with the injustice existing, yet having joy and inner peace, even with it still being there. So rather than remaining angry or getting even, and those being our two options, what if, instead of getting angry or even, we seek to be even-tempered? And in this, God, through Solomon, has some wisdom for us this morning. So we're going to be looking again in Ecclesiastes. Sometimes when we look at Ecclesiastes, we look at maybe just a few verses or a fraction of a chapter. Today we're actually going to be looking at 3 chapters. So it's a really large section, but there's a common theme that spans through most of these 3 chapters. So if you could please turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 8. That way you can kind of follow along with the text as we're going through this morning and looking at these things together. But what I hope to do in Ecclesiastes 8, 9, and 10 is to just read for you a few snapshots. And again, you can follow along as you're looking in the Bibles as well. I'm not going to have most of the text on the screen. But these are a few snapshots of observations that Solomon has that kind of give us a general feel of what he's talking about altogether. In Ecclesiastes 8:10, we read this. I have seen wicked people buried with honor. Yet, they were the very ones who frequented the temple and are now praised in the same city where they committed their crimes. Now, you've probably thought of somebody or maybe seen somebody where there's a sort of a similar kind of situation. Somebody's passed away, they're being honored and praised as some sort of a great person that they are, but the reality was they really weren't that wonderful of a person, right? I mean, there was a lot of things maybe that they did or said that maybe were harmful to other people. How unfair that they're being honored, even in their death. But it happens. Ecclesiastes 9:2. The same destiny ultimately awaits everyone, whether righteous or wicked, good or bad, ceremonial clean or unclean, religious or irreligious. Good people receive the same treatment as sinners, and people who make promises to God are treated like people who don't. So that's a rather unpleasant thought, but it's true, right? We recognize that there's a similarity, a commonality of what we all face. Obviously, ultimately, death. Death awaits everyone, regardless of how good or bad we may happen to be. But there's other common destinies as well, even beyond something like this, with similar levels of unfairness. Have you ever felt like, the rules out there, maybe even the law, it's actually serving to punish the people who follow the rules more than those who wouldn't follow the rules? I mean, I know I feel like that sometimes with certain laws. In North Carolina, it's actually illegal to play bingo for more than 5 hours straight. That's a law in North Carolina. Now, I'm not a bingo person. I'd rather a bingo game not last more than 5 minutes, let alone 5 hours. But to each their own. If you like bingo, that's fine. But the reason that this law is in place in North Carolina is because bingo can be considered a form of gambling. And the law was put in place to try and protect vulnerable populations from either institutional abuse, whoever's putting on the bingo game, or to try and prevent gambling addiction. So that's why they put this particular law in place. Now, I have a hard time believing that there are very many institutions out there that would pick bingo as their big hustle to try and make a bunch of money off of people. And honestly, if you have a gambling addiction and bingo is your game of choice, there's probably other issues going on. I don't really know. But still, in the interest of protecting against these bad institutions or protecting people from themselves, they put this law into place. The problem is that everybody, probably most people, who actually like bingo and want to play it all the time, get punished with this law. That is really what happens. Everybody basically gets treated the same way, even if most people are in no way causing a problem, or it's not a problem to them. Again, this is kind of unfair, basically. That is what that is. There's a toy store in the Wilton Mall. I'm not going to name it, but I swear that they hate children in that store, which is ironic. But every time you bring children in there, and I have done this, they give you the evil eye, like always. They're just staring you down. And if your child happens to touch something, you can just see it in them, how, the frustration inside of them is starting to boil over because your child would dare to touch something. Now, I'm sure those actions of those, owners was probably a result of, some kid broke something, maybe multiple times, or there were some really wild kids in the store, and the parents probably never ponied up to, you break it, you bought it kind of thing. They just kind of let it go, and so the store lost out. But the consequence is that with a few unethical parents or their wild kids or whatever it was, now there's a toy store that nobody can enjoy because they seem to just hate you being in there in the first place. So we're all being unfairly punished, even though it's just because of a behavioral problem of just a few people. On a more serious note, we are seeing something like this actually going on with the immigration policy right now in the United States. Now, I'm all for legal immigration. I'm against illegal immigration. I think that that's a good way of going. Now, I do have a very different perspective on immigration, largely because of my own experiences living overseas and some different things that I've seen. So my personal views on immigration tend to be very different than most Republicans and very different from most Democrats. I'm kind of an outlier in that. Regardless, what we are seeing as a country is in a response to the massive amounts of illegal immigration that has happened over the past several years, we've established a no-tolerance policy to immigration at all. And those policies are, although yes, they are cracking down on a lot of the illegal immigration, they're also negatively impacting legal immigrants. And the logic that's been put out there is if you're not a U.S. citizen and you commit a crime, you get deported, right? That is sort of the logic, which can make sense if somebody is they're dealing a bunch of drugs, if they're killing people. I mean, yeah, of course, that makes sense as a policy. But we are seeing some cases, and they may be very, very few cases, but we are seeing some cases where infractions are maybe committed and there are following deportation orders that are being drawn up, but the crimes we're talking about are on par with speeding tickets, right? So it's a really very minor things. And to me, I mean, even if somebody's intentionally speeding 10 plus miles an hour over the speed limit, I don't think it's a good policy for our country to have that be our metric for choosing to deport someone. I just don't personally think that that's a good idea, although there are others that really applaud that. They don't see it as a mistake. They see this is a good thing that they are putting in place. Even so, the end result, whether somebody agrees with it or not, is that the actions of a few, of extreme criminals, or the actions of people who are illegally doing things is now impacting those who otherwise were doing everything as they should. And it's seriously damaging everybody across the board, even those who might not normally be subject to the degree of punishment that they are being subjected to now. So the guilty and the innocent, in many ways and in many cases, end up being treated the same across the board. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. I have observed something else under the sun. The fastest runner doesn't always win the race, or the strongest warrior doesn't always win the battle. The wise sometimes go hungry, and the skillful are not necessarily wealthy. And those who are educated don't always lead successful lives. It is all decided by chance, by being in the right place at the right time. If you've tried to get any sort of a building project, a construction project done anytime recently, you've probably run into a similar experience as me, as contractors are in short supply. There's just not that many guys out there who are available to actually build things. And the result of there being this really high demand for people to do any kind of physical work in this way is that the guys who probably shouldn't be in business, either because they don't know what they're doing, so they don't do a good job, or they are unethical in that they cut corners, normally you would think that they would suffer negative consequences because of their poor practices of actually doing construction. But because there's such a high demand, there really are no negative repercussions. They still get paid, they get other jobs, it keeps on going. And the real shame of the whole thing is the guy who's honest, who does do a good job, he can't charge more for his services because he's competing with all these other guys. So he's forced to either squeeze his profits, to do 3 hours of work for the price of 1, or cut corners for himself and be like everyone else. I mean, how unfortunate, how unfair for the guy who's trying to do the right thing. Chapter 10, verses 5 and through 7. Then there's another evil I have seen under the sun. Kings and rulers make a grave mistake when they give great authority to foolish people and low positions to people of proven worth. I have seen servants riding horseback like princes, and princes walking like servants. I had not heard this term before, but maybe you've heard the term the Peter principle. It's actually a conjecture made by this man named Dr. Lawrence Peter. He wrote a book, and in the book, he had this idea that was based on whatever it was in his experience that kind of led him to this way. But his idea is that organizations, businesses, whatever they are, they tend to promote people who do a good job, which of course makes sense. You do a good job, you're probably going to get promoted. But his thought was, according to the Peter principle, is that if you always promote the person who does a good job, eventually they're going to get to a level of promotion where they do a bad job, right? Because eventually you're going to end up with something you can't do. And so as a result, if you're always promoting all the people who do well, eventually nobody does well because everybody's at a level where they're doing something that they just don't do well. And his sort of statement was that everyone rises to their level of incompetence. That is the Peter principle. Now, I don't know that that is really true in practice in most places. In fact, I would say any well-run business can't possibly operate that way. I mean, even here, in some ways, I kind of function a little bit like a CEO in terms of trying to coordinate volunteers and everything else that is going on. But I don't operate that way. I mean, if somebody is struggling and somebody's not doing as well in a certain thing, I try to shift them over to where they are doing something well. And if something needs to be changed, if more discipleship or skill building is needed, I try to do those things as well. And again, if that's true for me, then I'm sure that other businesses out there, probably most other businesses, are going to be operating that way. But even from my own experience, I know that's not been true for every place I have worked. That's not always that way. I've seen other jobs where people are promoted more based on who they know, maybe their time on the job, maybe a score on an exam, as opposed to their real life experience and ability. And what ends up happening in those organizations is many times you will get managers who don't know how to manage. You get leaders who are rather foolish in their way of leading. But we might feel jealous about that, understandably. I could feel jealous about that. Those of us who are more qualified are getting passed over for those who are unqualified. Again, how unfair. It is an unfair way of things being. In Ecclesiastes 10, 8, and 9, it says, when you dig a well, you might fall in. When you demolish an old wall, you could be bitten by a snake. When you work in a quarry, stones might fall and crush you. When you chop wood, there's danger with each stroke of the axe. Life is unfair. And that's pretty much what Solomon's talking about here. As they say, no good deed goes unpunished, right? No good deed goes unpunished. Life is not fair. Now, a few weeks back, we talked about the wheel of pain. I talked about how going through those trials, as Solomon was talking about, even in those trials, we can actually grow. We can grow in spiritual maturity. We can grow in our character because of the pain and suffering and difficulty that we're engaging in and hopefully working our way through. So in a way, even though we're in those things, we can still have joy because we can be like, okay, it's hard right now, but at least I'm going to grow through this thing. So we sort of have a future perspective on growth, and we can have joy in that. But here in Ecclesiastes, in these 3 chapters, really, Solomon takes us in a little bit of a different direction. Because rather than focusing on joy now because of a future reward or a future character growth, Solomon says something that maybe is a little bit unexpected. Not unexpected in the sense that we haven't encountered this before. We've actually seen this in other parts of the text as we've talked together. But I'm going to read you a couple passages first. In Ecclesiastes 8:15, right after being told how the wicked prosper and are honored, so wicked people prosper, wicked people are honored, Solomon says this in Ecclesiastes 8:15. So I recommend having fun. because there's nothing better for people in this world than to eat, drink, and enjoy life. That way, they will experience some happiness along with all the hard work God gives them under the sun. So that's one case of Solomon saying something very different. Then again, right after we are told whether people are good or whether people are bad, evil, whatever it is, that everyone is going to face the same fate, ultimately death, Solomon says this in Ecclesiastes 9, 7 through 10. So go ahead, eat your food with joy and drink your wine with a happy heart, for God approves of this. Wear fine clothes with a splash of cologne. Live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God has given you under the sun. The wife God gives you is your reward for all your earthly toil. Whatever you do, do well. For when you go to the grave, there will be no work or planning or knowledge or wisdom. And just in these couple of passages, we see once again really what is the predominant message that Solomon has in this book. In this, he uses again the word meaningless, but really that means fleeting. In this fleeting, temporal, very short-lived life that we live, a life that can be full of pain, in unfairness, in trouble, all of those things. Even so, in this life, we should seize and enjoy the moments that we have. Seize and enjoy the moments within the confines, within the limits of obeying and honoring God. Again, that is a critical underlying understanding in this. But we should seize and enjoy the moments that we actually have, despite how unfair life may be. And this is actually a response to what I was suggesting in the very beginning of this message. When we are confronted with injustice in life, when we're angry, when we are frustrated, even jealous by what might be going on, but we can't do anything about the injustice, at least nothing ethical or moral or godly. And when those feelings of anger or jealousy or frustration don't or can't motivate us towards a positive action in some way, instead of just staying there stewing in those emotions, we should instead come to terms with a form of acceptance of the injustice. Again, not excusing it, but through accepting that this is the reality we are in, this is the unfairness that we are in, we can actually live in joy and inner peace. This is being even-tempered as opposed to getting even, despite the world around us, despite what we see. But that is actually a conscious choice we have to make. We have to make the choice to do that. That despite how unfair life is, choose joy. And choose joy in those moments you have. Whatever they are, how few or many they might be. The way your life has gone, you might have the most garbage car imaginable. It just might be a total piece of junk. Rust spots, falling apart, it's ugly, it's dirty. You might have jealousy because somebody else has got a really nice car. Or maybe you're just jealous because it actually works. You may have anger at a person because it seems like they've sort of cheated their way through life, and that's why they have the money to afford what they have. But those emotions are not going to do much for you in a beneficial way. Just kind of holding on to those things. But you could, as perhaps ridiculous as it might sound, you could actually have joy in what you do have. In the car that you have. You could bling it out. That'd be kind of funny, actually. You get your windows tinted, get personalized license plate on the back, spinners on the wheels. I've seen that before on a minivan. It's pretty funny. I mean, if it's a piece of garbage, just have your kids paint it, right? I mean, they could do all sorts of fun stuff all over it. I mean, that would definitely make a memory. That'd be kind of fun. Nobody else would do that. It'd be a much better story. So you can choose to enjoy what you have, regardless of what that is or on how unfair that may seem. The way my family has prioritized things, just with our finances and stuff over the last several years, having a really nice bike for myself was not in the cards, right? So this last year, we went to an organization in Saratoga that gives away bikes for free. I mean, they're not nice bikes, but they're free. So, I was mainly just looking to be able to ride around the neighborhood with my kids while they were on their bikes. And so, it fit the bill. I was able to get a bike to do that. But as it would happen, the first time we're going to go out to all ride together, we're going to take a really short ride. There was a super heavy downpour, just a ton of rain, came out of nowhere. It dumped on us. We got totally soaked. The kids were pedaling fast. I was kind of thinking they were going to get freaked out by the whole thing, that it was going to be a negative experience, that this was going to negatively impact even our ability to do something like this in the future. Because nobody would choose that situation. I mean, you wouldn't want a junk bike. You wouldn't want all the rain, all that stuff. That's not what you would choose to do if you had the choice of going for a bike ride. But the kids were actually laughing through the whole thing. They thought it was funny. They thought it was funny that suddenly they were riding through the rain amidst this whole downpour. And the situation itself made a really good memory for the family. It was something we could enjoy, take joy in the moment. But maybe for you it's something more serious, right? I mean, these are fairly light things. But maybe it's something more serious. Maybe you keep getting passed up for a job. Maybe you are never recognized for the efforts that you put in. Maybe that's because everybody else is cheating in some way, or they're cutting corners. Similar situation to Lance Armstrong. Maybe you're tempted to cave on your ethics to kind of even the playing field, but you're still standing strong. But even so, maybe you're getting a little bit resentful, you're getting a little bit angry. But even in a situation like that, as difficult as that is, we can still make a choice, a conscious choice to choose joy. There are pastors out there who are very successful. They're successful because they pray on their congregations. Not that they pray for their congregations. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, I pray for you. That's important. But you are not my prey. Some of these pastors are predatory, preying on their congregations. And their success is largely because of that predatory attitude that they have and how they deal with the congregations. So I don't envy their methods at all. But they're successful. At least if you want to count success in terms of financial numbers and numbers of people. And it would be nice, honestly, to say, hey, maybe if we had a little bit of that kind of success, a little bit of those numbers, a little bit of that type of financial growth. But of course, that would mean adopting similar tactics. And not that every church that grows is doing unethical things. But I don't want to do that stuff, obviously. But I can still feel a little bit jealous. I can still feel resentful. I can feel angry that these Christians and these churches are being taken advantage of in this way. But I, too, have to make the conscious choice to choose joy. That's what I have to do. Because there's good reason to be joyful about what God is doing here. There's great things that are going on here because we are a very healthy church. We're a very healthy church, and we are growing in very healthy ways. Just in the last couple months, 2 or 3 months, I've seen some amazing things. As individuals here, many of you have stepped up into new levels of responsibility, stepped into new things, and it just, stuff that's maybe been kind of stagnating for a while as we've sort of been waiting for some growth and some just development of skill sets. But we've had some breakthroughs in that, which again is exciting to watch. And honestly, in many ways, some of the spiritual growth that I've seen here is beyond what I've seen in other places, other churches that I've been part of. And again, it's not that those churches are doing it wrong and we're doing it right, but it is abnormal. And it's exciting to see that type of spiritual growth. But I have to choose to celebrate in that. to be excited in that, and not dissatisfied with and angry about and frustrated, and focus on the things that maybe we don't have, or the things maybe that I want to see, and have fun in the good stuff, and not stew in any negative emotions that might kind of brew up in myself. Life is unfair. Not everything is perfect. We're never promised everything we could ever want. Life is frustrating. It is angering. It can be jealousy provoking. At times, we can take action, moral action, righteous action, and that is great when we're able to do that. But when we can't, we can either stew in the emotion and the anger, or we can be even-tempered and choose joy. What will you choose today? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the good and gracious God that you are. We thank you for this check on our emotions, God, as we can just be focused on the negative. We can be focused on the injustice. We can be focused on the unfairness. And yes, God, you've called us to try and work in and pursue righteousness in any way that we can. But we can't do that in everything. Just some things are well beyond our control or ability. But we thank you that you have not left us to just sit in anger and frustration and jealousy and unhappiness. That even in those moments of suffering and difficulty and trials, you have told us and you have shown us in your own life, as you lived and walked and breathed, spread the gospel, and ultimately died for our sins, that even despite the difficulty, we can choose joy. We can choose righteousness. So God, this morning, I just pray that you would help us to be making the conscious choice, that you would empower us to make the choice of joy, that you would let joy just flow up in us as a fruit of the Spirit, that we'd be a people of joy. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.